Okay, before we jump in, there was a question that I wanted to ask before we get things started from the audience.
What's up, Salt Lake?
Okay, so you hear a lot about millennials, and everyone's worried about millennials and whether or not they're going to be willing to sacrifice in the same way. And then, of course, students today around the country walked out of class to protest inaction on that. On gun control, what do you make of young people today? Do you feel hopeful or worried?
No, I think that the young people of our country are going to be the salvation of our country. I would believe that.
It's interesting that one of the things, Peter, that you profile in the film is the context of the time that was going on, the civil rights movement, and all these different. There was feminism on the on the go, and there was civil rights on the go, and this idea, as Angela Davis talks about in the film, that revolutionary change was possible. And I'm wondering if you assess now what's going on, the sense of concern. Do you think it's a similar kind of time as you look at it?
I do. Like Dolores said, I think we're seeing something very similar to what happened in the '60s with this new generation. I think they probably are more aware than perhaps the generations in the '60s of how important coalition building is. Because you see a lot of activist and movement building happening today where it's so far beyond silo organizing. People are building coalitions to move their agenda forward, and so I think that's a very positive thing to see happening right now.
But I believe that in the 60s, in the 70s, we had a cultural revolution.
Yeah.
We had where women were speaking up for their rights, the LGBT community was speaking up for their rights. We had the beginning of the environmental movement, the Chicano movement. And I think that the next evolution, maybe we won't call it revolution, so definitely a nonviolent revolution, will be an economic revolution. Because we have a situation in today's world where you have 1% of the families in the United States own 50% of the wealth. Where you have 10% of the corporations and multi-families own 90% of the wealth of the United States of America. And this is not right, because the resources of our country and the wealth of our country should be owned by all of the citizens of the United States of America, not just a few.
What would you say, Dolores? What if you could boil it down? What's your gift? What's the thing you're really good at? Why were you good at this?
Well, luckily I learned, because I didn't know, from Fred Ross Sr., whom you saw in the film, whom I call the Caucasian, Anglo, Gringo, father of the Chicano movement. Because he is the one that taught Cesar how to organize, taught me how to organize, in this very simple method that we use of house meetings, meeting in people's homes, meeting with them for a whole hour, so we can talk about the issues, but also give them examples of how people like them, ordinary people, farm workers, poor people, working people, how they have been able to solve the problems in their communities. And by bringing them all together and taking direct nonviolent action, this is a way that people make changes. And of course, by getting involved in the voting process. And we learned this process from Mr. Ross, Cesar, and myself. And this is a way that we organize the Farm Workers Union. And the organization that we belonged to before that, the Community Service Organization, where we were able to pass major legislation in California, like getting the right to register voters door to door, which, by the way, you can't do that in Texas. All of you here that have relatives in Texas, tell them they've got to get with it, because in Texas you have to go to a deputy registrar to get registered to vote. And so we wonder why we have such bad representation in Texas. That's one of the reasons why, okay? And so we passed all of this major legislation, including allowing, as you saw in the film, people who were legal residents of the United States to be able to get public assistance. So today we have about 15 million people who are resident immigrants of the United States that are able to get the Affordable Care Act. And all of this was done by organizing people on the ground. And this is the gift that Fred Ross gave me as an organizer, and this is what we do with my foundation, the Dolores Huerta Foundation, And we're able to change many, many communities, change policies at the local level, at the state, and at the national level. And so this is, I consider myself an organizer that empowers people. And I think that's what we have to do, because once people know that they have the power, that they can actually organize and make policy changes, get good people elected to our different positions, that this is the way that we can improve things and change things.
Is that what you mean when you said in the film, the power is in your body?
Yes, exactly. And this is what we would tell farm workers they would say, how can you organize them? Well, they're poor, they're not citizens, they don't speak English, they don't have any money at work. How can you possibly organize them? And our message to the workers, and this is our message to everybody today, is that you have power, but that power is in your person. And but you can't do it by yourself. You've got to get together with other people in the collective way, and then not just think about it or talk about it, but take the actions that need to be taken so that we can, again, get good people in office and change policies.
I wonder, one of the things that I had mentioned before the film began was that in a conversation I had with Peter, he talked about how important it was that he show a portrait of a fully fleshed out human being. He showed that it was difficult sometimes for your kids. That's obviously a part of the film. And I'm wondering just how you reacted to that, how difficult that might be to see, or what you made of the fact that Peter wanted to make a film that showed the difficult parts of the story.
She didn't want to do it.
Well, a couple of things. Number one, we did have daycare for our children in the union, so all the children were taken care of. And I know that this is something that every single family, every working mother faces this every single day. They have to think about who's going to take care of my kids while I go to work, while I go to school, or whatever it may be. So this is something that I think we have to fight for, to get universal daycare for our kids so that they can be not only taken care of, but become educated at the same time. And it's something that we should be able to have in our United States of America, like they do in other countries, right? We don't have that. The other thing is my children had a lot of wonderful experiences growing up, and my son Ricky tells it very well, and I'm going to quote him. He did this when we were doing a Q&A, and he said this, he said, yes, my mother abandoned us in the parking lot of a Safeway store, and with a stack of leaflets, right, that we had to pass out to people that said, boycott grapes, right? And then he said, when they would come out and say, you dirty little Mexican commies, why don't you go back to Mexico? He said, well, we can't, we don't have a right, okay? But what he said, what Rick says, he said, we had to share our mother with the world, but on the other hand, she shared the world with us. And so they had many great experiences growing up, and that's why we like to encourage everyone, please take your children, your little sisters and brothers, your nephews and nieces, take them to marches, take them to protests, because that's the way that they live the experience of being in movement, right? And no one has to tell them about it because they will have lived it, and then they are prepared. And like Rick says, just being in the movement really prepared us for the racism and the obstacles that we had to face in life.
Okay, I know there are a few questions there. Yes, let's go ahead.
First, thank you for your service. I can really say that from my heart. You brought back the inspiration and idealism I had when I was a youth, and I remember my father coming home with picket signs in Chicago as a teacher. And though I had made the mistake of taking French, I became a Spanish teacher, but you taught me my first 3 Spanish words. Uvas, lechuga, y huelga. So, now with the youth here, and let's hear it for all the young people that are here, and the teachers who are, getting out on a new movement. You organize people who were said to be unorganizable, the farm workers. What about the youth now, the high school kids? What kind of tactics could you bring to this movement that's just budding right now and move it forward? How can they be organized to make some changes?
Well, I think we saw in today's news that many of the high school kids walked out today, right, to protest anti-gun violence. And the great thing about today's world is that they have their cell phones, and they have the internet, and they can Facebook, and they can, everything, Instagram. They can mobilize people very fast, as apparently they probably did for today's walkouts and marches. The only cautionary note that I would make is that, and we think of the Occupy movement, how great that movement was, and brought the attention of the world, the difference between the 1% that have the wealth and the 99% that don't have it. But when we think is where is the Occupy movement at today? So we have to think in terms of structure and of organization. And I think movements are fabulous, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, etc. But we have to think in terms of how do we structure these movements so that they are lasting movements. So again, if we go back and we think about the women's rights movement and the green movement, there has been structure to those organizations, so they're still around today, 50 years later, they're still alive. And so I think that's the one thing that we have to think about is how can we make some of these movements lasting, so it's not just a mobilization at the moment of the issue at the moment, but that we really come together to make permanent change in our country. And this is going to be very repetitious of me, but I'll keep saying it over and over and over again. And because we are in a democracy, the way that we make change and the way we change policies is to elect good people to all of our, be it our school board, our water boards, our city council, our commissioners, our supervisors, our state legislature, and the Congress, of course. That is the way we make lasting change. So all of the marches and the protests are wonderful because, we give them momentum and to movements. But unless we take those protests and marches to the ballot box, nothing changes. That nothing changes, and that's the one thing that we have to really emphasize.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, first of all, for being such an inspiration to me and I think a few others in the audience. The movements, being a part of a movement, the movements get tangled within each other. And it was such a beautiful moment in the movie to see you and Gloria standing side by side in a march despite a fundamental difference in belief. Can you speak towards what that was like and what we should do as movements now to not get tangled within ourselves?
Well, a lot of the differences that we have, I like to say, is just a lack of knowledge. When it comes to women's reproductive rights, when it comes to LGBT rights, I love to quote the indigenous president of Mexico, Benito Juarez, and he had a great saying that I like to quote, and that is, el respeto al derecho ajeno es la paz, respecting other people's rights is peace. And again, when it comes to a woman's right to her own body, and her women's right to access to abortion, and that is a woman's choice, and no one should interfere with that. Likewise, it is with gay rights. Who somebody loves or wants to marry, that is their right. It doesn't affect your family. It's their right, and it should be respected. These are human rights, and I do believe that in our society today, the reason that we have such division, such separation, is that we have a lot of what I call abysmal ignorance in our society. And because in our curriculums and in our schools, we have never been taught, especially starting with kindergarten, about what the contributions of people of color have been to our country. When we think of our Native Americans, who were the first slaves in the United States of America, and whose land we have never compensated them for it, we have never thanked them for it, even knowing that many of our reservations, people still live in dire poverty. And then we think of African slaves that built the White House and the Congress, and many of the buildings that we have in Washington, D.C., even Montebello, Jefferson's place, in Virginia, and the contributions of people from Mexico. Mexicans are great, by the way, okay? But all of these immigrants that came to the United States to build our country, the people from Asia, Japan, China, the Philippines, people from India, all of these people of color that built the country, and that is not taught in our school books. And it needs to be taught, because that way our children of color will never feel the respect that they deserve for what their people did to build our country, and our Anglo children will always be poisoned with the idea of white supremacy and white privilege. So we have to, we have the structure in our country to change all of this. We have the educational structure, but we've got to change the content, right? We've got to change the content, and we've got to do that as soon as we possibly can. If we're going to stop the racism, the misogyny, the sexism, the homophobia in our society.
teaching us. I too am an organizer, and I'm young, and I'm just getting started in it. Specifically for conservation of the environment, for protecting our last remaining wildlands. And my job in this is to root the Latinx and Chicanx heritage in this land. And so my question to you, and hopefully that I can take to learn, is how would you advise for building movement from my racial community in a current movement that's existed for a very long time that isn't seen as a Chicanx or a Latinx issue, conservation, wilderness, but for any social issue for the matter.
Well, I think that the environmental movement, I think, is something that's so critical, because if we don't take care of Mother Earth, we're going to perish. And, I don't care what side you're on, Republican, Democrat, whatever, we're all affected by the environment. And, again, going back to indigenous roots, indigenous people, wherever they were at, wherever they left the places sterile when they left, just the way that they were when they got there. And that's what we have to think of Mother Earth, of someone that we have to take care of. And we know we have a lot of behaviors in our society that are very harmful and dangerous to Mother Earth. The use of pesticides, for instance, which we saw in the film. And we're not going to be able to change that until we can get all of the application of poisons, economic poisons, on our planet, take them out of agriculture, take them out of the EPA, and put it under health and human services, right? Because these are poisons and they're on our food, and we have the highest cancer rate in the world. And there are so many other things. And materialism. We have a society of materialism. Buy as much as you can. Again, going back to indigenous cultures, Evo Morales, the president of Bolivia, another indigenous president, said, we have to learn how to live well, but the European model is how to live better and better and better. And we can never catch up, because we always want more and more things. And our planet cannot sustain this. And we want to impose our way of life on other countries and other cultures. There's always buying. And, Japan, Germany, and the United States, we consume 75% of the world's resources, our three countries. And when we think about that, how many things do we have that we don't need? And you never saw a hearse in a funeral with a U-Haul on the back, right? Because we can't take it, you can't take it with you. And Gandhi always said, we have to learn how to live simply so that others can simply live. We have to live simply so that others can simply live. Yeah. And I think joining all of us, I think, can help and support environmental organizations in terms of conserving things and getting rid of things that pollute our planet, like the plastic bags and things of that nature. And it is a matter of changing our lifestyles. Thank you.
I want to add one thing, and that is, one of the things that we've learned in Dolores' story is that our stories, the narrative that we live by, is so crucial and critical, especially at this time. And a lot of the Latinos who you're referring to, oftentimes the environmental issue is framed as a white issue. Even the LGBT equality issue is oftentimes framed as a white issue, but it's an issue that involves everybody. We are, in fact, the environment, and I think if you tap back into our older narratives, and I'm talking about not just in the United States or Canada, but in Central America and Latin America, those are indigenous people. And there wasn't this idea of separation. There's me and then there's the environment. It was one and the same. And so I think we just have to shift a little bit to adjust the narrative that we frame the conversation. So as a Latina who's in the environmental movement, I applaud you. But I also encourage you to tap into some of the older histories. It was Evo Morales he's a full-blooded indigenous person, the first freely elected in Bolivia, but he's also a Latino. And they started a movement 2 years ago where they recognized the rights of the planet, of the creation, all beings. And that came from his indigenous story, his narrative. And so it's really important to tap those resources and apply them today. So you're a Latina saying, what is the connection? It's a deeply rooted connection. And I encourage you to explore it and use those as tools to move forward.
Go ahead. And we'll come back to you. All right? Go back.
First of all, thank you so much for coming. This is so important for everybody to hear, and I think my question is kind of piggybacking on these, but what is your, I think we all have a lot of, passion and some anger and, drive to change these things, but as a leader, what was your most effective way of, channeling that passion into, Cesar KUER and getting others enjoying, and what was your most effective way to do that as a leader?
Well, I think just always adopting the whole philosophy of nonviolence. And when we talk about nonviolence, it's not only deeds, but it's also words. And I can give you a couple of examples. Of course, you saw in the film how farm workers were killed, how often we were beaten. We had rifles shot at us, etc., and the things that we never responded with violence. And that was very important to be able to to keep our less of our people getting killed. There were 5 people actually that got killed in the farm workers struggle. And every time that someone, one of our martyrs was killed, we did a 3-day fast. Everybody went on a 3-day fast to combat the nonviolence. And I can think of a really good example. When Caesar was on his last fast, which you saw just a picture of Caesar in a bed in the movie, but he had done a 36-day water-only fast. And again, that was for nonviolence and actually about the issue of pesticides. But one of his granddaughters was passing out leaflets inviting people to come to the masses that we had every single night. And one woman said to her, she said, my grandfather is on his fast. He's on his, I think by that time it was like 20th day of the fast. And she said to her, I hope your grandfather dies. And so she started crying, and when she went back, she told Caesar, and Caesar said, I didn't know what to say to him. And Caesar said, if somebody tells you that, tell them that we have them in our prayers also. We will also pray for them. And I think that's the way, again, going back to the Gandhian principles of thinking of responding to hate with love, responding to hate with prayers. And that is a way that we can handle it. And of course, we all know the prayer of St. Francis, right? Where this is what he also advocates. And it does make people a lot stronger. We were worried about that when we started the movement. Because, there was a history of violence, of course, in Mexico and in most cultures, and we were worried about how people would handle that. And of course, Caesar did that with his fast. So he had 3 fasts, one for 25 days, the first one in Delano, the second one in Arizona, and the third one, again, against pesticides in Delano, California. And I know sometimes it's difficult, especially when we're trying to talk to other people about these issues and they don't quite understand, and we get frustrated, we get angry, but we just have to remember that they're not ready to hear our message yet. But that doesn't mean that we should give up. We should still talk to people, because at some point it will get through to them, and we never know at what moment that will happen. But in the meantime, have patience and try to say we're going to pray with you or pray for you. Even if you don't have to tell them that, but you can do it silently in your own mind, right? And by the way, this year is the 150th year of Mahatma Gandhi's birthday, okay? 150th year. So in some of your schools, if the parents are here, teachers, see if they can celebrate that, because right now we're living in such a culture of violence in our country that I think it would be good to talk about some of these principles and philosophies of Gandhi.
Let me just ask one thing. I wanted to get Peter on something related, because it seems like there's such a theme in the film about love. Luis Valdez talks about how the heart of some of these movements are self-love. Peter, would you say something about that? I think this idea of love really comes up in the film time again.
Yeah. Has anybody seen the movie Black Panther? I feel like that's an example of the love you're talking about. And I mean, here it is, it's 2018. And I think the film it broke a world record, global box office of over $1 million. And part of the phenomena of the picture, it's a great story, well told, well acted. But aside from that, it features all black people. in all their glory and beauty. And that is a phenomenon in the year 2018, I think speaks to this kind of love. Audiences, particularly African American audiences, but I think also audiences of color, are starved to see, that on the big screen, front and center, because it's such a rare thing. And so I think what Luis is talking about is, for 5 centuries, you have people who have been taught to be ashamed of their color, of their language, of their spiritual heritage, everything about their being. And then all of a sudden, something awakens. He says revolution starts with self-respect, self-love. So you start regarding yourself in a different way. And I think that the generations in the 60s helped us move to where we are right now, but we still have a long way to go. And I think that's, again, it goes back to the importance of, like Dolores said, no one can take away your story. And that story is so critical. There's not just one story, one narrative to this country. It's so complex, it's so rich, and it has so many chapters, but we're so unfamiliar with many of those chapters. And so it's really important to revisit and bring those stories to the fore, because I think you won't have things as this. I mean, people are in awe of this film that features all black people. In 2018, it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way. So I think the importance of self-respect and self-love is very, very critical to any social movement. And I think you saw that with the women's movement. We are not objects. We are not here just to serve men's pleasure. There was a self-acknowledgement and a self-assessment aside from that. And I think you saw that in the American Indian movement, the Black Power movement, the LGBTQ movement, the same thing. An oppressed people, an oppressed community, all of a sudden saying, no, we matter. We are beautiful. We love ourselves. That's the first step.
Yeah, and I guess we could say that about the farm workers too, because remember, and by the way, thank all of you. I want to thank all of you who supported the farm worker movement, those of you that didn't eat grapes, that were on picket lines, and, because you made it possible for farm workers to be able to have the toilets in the fields, cold drinking water, rest periods, the right to organize, unemployment insurance, etc. But it goes back to what the question that you asked, because farm workers were so denigrated, and they, but once the farm worker movement started, then they were able to claim their dignity, for putting the food on everybody's table every single day. And I think this is so true of working people. And this is, of course, one of the things that labor unions do, is that they are able to give working people the dignity and the respect that they deserve for all of the work that they do to keep us safe and secure, and all of the work that they do to make our life habitable. And so I think that's a really important question that you asked.
Yes.
Hello, Dolores. My name is Selena. I've been an activist for 20 years, a single mom for 16 years of only 2 children. I can't imagine 11 children. I cannot imagine 11 children. My question is, we've got some young activists here, we've got some middle-aged activists, some older activists. How on earth do you stay so positive, protect your energy? What do you eat for breakfast? How do you keep on going and not get discouraged or tired?
Well,
start with breakfast.
well, number one, oatmeal. Number one, I don't eat meat. Okay, I'm a pescatarian, so I think that helps me a lot. And I keep busy. But as long as I can sleep and I can eat, I'm doing really good. Especially on these tours that we're on with the film. And but the other thing is really important is just to stay active. And the reason I don't give up, and by the way, I'm going to be 88 years old in a couple of weeks. It's because I can always see what incredible changes that we can make when people get together and people organize. And in my own foundation, we have just won some really big victories on our stopping the school-to-prison pipeline. We sued our school district, and We won that lawsuit, and they've got to change all of their practices to keep our kids in school instead of expelling them, suspending them, our African American Latino children. We won another lawsuit against our board of supervisors, again on redistricting because we had no Latino representation. When we see how many of our people that we've organized are running for office and getting elected to office, even though they've never been to high school or to college, but they are getting these positions on school boards, city councils, recreation boards, utility boards, and this is what makes it it really keeps you going, because the more communities that we can touch, the more communities that we can get people to organize and make them understand that they've got the power, and they can get their own people to run for office and get elected and make the changes in their community that need to be made. That is such a strong, I guess we could say, medicine, right? We use native language. And when people see that they have that power and they step up there and they make those changes, you just want to touch as many communities as you can. Right now in our organization, the Dolores Huerta Foundation, we're active in 2 different counties in California, in the Central Valley. We're active in 10 different school districts. And, we've got 20 organizers that we've got out there working really hard. And so the more people that we can teach them that lesson, that you've got the power and you can make it happen in your own community, and people, once they learn that, then there's just no stopping them. And so that's something that you want to be able to continue as much as you can. Thank you.
And every night she dances till the break of dawn.
Dolores, it's such a pleasure to face you tonight, Peter as well. I'm originally from Mexico, but I grew up in the United States, and I have a unique background that my mother is fully Mexican with a lot of indigenous background, and my father is half American, half Chicano. And so I saw both worlds growing up, and I lost that culture myself when we moved to the United States when I was 4. And felt this big push to learn English very quickly and to leave behind what was just barely becoming who I was, in the sense of who I was as a Latina, as a Mexican. And my mother worked full time, and she was a single mom and 5 kids, and I felt very deeply in watching you the sense of pride that you have in our culture, and I very much appreciate that. And something that I would like to address is that you're absolutely right, that yes, in our bodies, that's all that we truly need. And later in life, I'm in my 30s, but later in life I found who I was and what I would like to do with myself. And Peter, I appreciate that you're here, because I'm someone trying to break into the film industry. I wrote my first sitcom, and it entirely speaks to the Latino culture, but how important we are as Latinos to the American fabric. And I wanted to do that in a way that wasn't in someone's face, and so I thought a sitcom would be a great way to further help the narrative. And the question that I have, there is a question there. Peter, how do you feel as a filmmaker, how open is Hollywood today to our stories? And how did you feel in bringing Dolores' story to the big screen?
I have never worked in the Hollywood system, so I really couldn't tell you. All my films have been independent films, so oftentimes it takes 5-6 years to raise the money to make the films, and then thank God all my films also premiered at Sundance, so we've always gotten distribution. But I have tried to break in to within the Hollywood system, but I have yet to crack the nut, so maybe one day I'll get there.
So is what you're saying is if one door's closed, find another one?
I mean, I love making films, and in independent filmmaking, it's part of that process is going out and knocking on doors and asking 1,000 people, to invest and believe in your story. And 1,000 times you'll hear no, but if you really believe in it and you have to tell it, I believe the right door will eventually open. So I think today as a filmmaker you have to be like a cross trainer, so I'm into the docs, short docs, feature, narrative, television, half-hour, comedy, drama. I feel like you have to be ready to tackle all those, and there's so many different platforms right now, and certainly with what we saw with Coco and Black Panther, I think there is some light, kind of illuminating things a little bit, and people say, oh wow, Maybe we don't have to have white folks in the lead role all the time. You know what I mean? Like, oh, there is a market for different content. So I think it's a really great time to be a storyteller.
I appreciate you both. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Yara Mercado, and my question for you, Dolores, is what would you say to the DACA students who are trying to accomplish their American dream and strive in this country when their future is being threatened?
Did you say dreamers?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you say to dreamers who are trying to accomplish the American dream and yet it's being threatened?
Well, I just want to, number one, I want to congratulate them and thank them for all of their leadership and the activism that they've showed all of us. And also, we do know that we have California, New York, our attorney generals have filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration so that the Dreamers can stay here. We don't know what the final decision is going to be. You know, it all depends on the U.S. Congress. And I'd love to remind people this is 2018. And we have elections coming up in November. So if we can get a good Congress elected, I think that will be the best chance that we have for the Dreamers to be able to stay here. So I just want to encourage everybody. I know a lot of you in the audience that you're voters, but that's not enough. We've got to get out there and campaign. We've got to, join a campaign for a particular congressperson so that we can make sure that we get good congresspeople elected to the Congress that will support the Dreamers. We can make it happen. I think just with the people in this audience right now, there's enough of us right now that we could probably win a few elections to the Congress, because that is going to be the final hope. And I just want to add to this too. You know, when we think about immigration, it is not a crime for people to cross the border without documents. It's a civil offense, because you're not hurting anybody when you cross the border. It's a civil offense. They have made it a crime. When people get deported, they have made it a felony. Why? To put people in prison and to build more prisons for immigrants. I mean, this is crazy. Cesar Chavez's mother, when she crossed the border, she paid 2 pennies to cross the border. In 1964, I could go out and give a whole lecture on immigration, but in 1963, when they ended the Bracero program in 1963, we legalized tens of thousands of the braceros without any legislation. How did it happen? It just happened, right? And when we got the amnesty bill, which, by the way, I kind of, saw that bill through the Congress, we legalized about 6 million people. And all they had to do with the farm workers, for instance, is show that they had worked 90 days, 50 consecutive years. That was it. And so now they have made it burdensome, and it's all political. It's all got to do with politics. It's all got to do with racism, So we've got to just come back to the way that we always had it in the United States. Every single immigrant group that came to the United States got their residency and they got their citizenship. Okay, so what they're doing now is very, very wrong. So please, everybody, join the election movement in November and get out there and campaign for somebody good. Okay, thank you.
Even on stage, she's organizing. This is great. Yes. So I'm a little worried about time. We're going to try to get to as much as we can. Let's go for it.
Hi, my name is Ariana. What was the most empowering thing for you when you were an operator, a young organizer?
What was the most empowering moment?
Thing for you as a young activist?
As a young person?
Yeah.
Well, I was a Girl Scout. I was a Girl Scout from the time I was 8 to the time I was 18 years old, and I think that was very empowering for me. The other thing was, this is maybe not empowering, but facing a lot of discrimination in high school from police who would always stop us after our basketball games and football games, and they would harass us and search us and everything when we were just coming home from a game. But that just made me really angry, and I think all of that anger stayed with me until I was able to deal with it by organizing. So I think sometimes when these things happen, is if we can, keep those to ourselves, but then think some way I'm going to be able to change this, and I think that motivated me a lot. But being a Girl Scout definitely helped me a lot. Okay, and thank you.
So be a Girl Scout and have oatmeal for breakfast. We're learning a lot. Yeah.
My name's Angie, and I have 4 kids. 2 of them are high schoolers, so they got to think about today whether or not to participate in the walkout. And I had one that was like, I'm sitting in class, I'm going to play on my phone. And then the other one, my senior, went outside. So anyway, the first question tonight was about young people. And I learned so much from watching this film. And so I just got on YouTube. I'm like, can my kids just watch this? And I see that there was one and it was deleted. Anyway, how can it be shown in high schools? Can it be streamed? How's it going to get on my kids' eyeballs, all the young people, so that they can learn?
Peter, that's for you.
All right. Dolores had its premiere at last year's Sundance Film Festival on Inauguration Day. And then we opened in theaters in September, and we just closed our theatrical run 3 weeks ago. And then on March 27th, this month, it's going to premiere on PBS's Independent Lens. And I think it will play several times over the course of 30 days. And then PBS also has developed a curriculum around the film and made the film available to educators throughout the country. So they will know Dolores' story.
Okay. I gotta follow up because I want it to be shown in the high schools. So, what do I do now? Do we have ethnic studies band at my high school?
Oh, that's the other thing. We'd like to think that the film helped, but last month, a federal judge ruled that the ethnic studies ban in Arizona was unconstitutional and racist, and so they reversed it. That was last month. And from what we heard, that the film helped move the needle forward a little bit, but as the amendment that was passed in Texas, which has the largest school district in the country and therefore determines what the textbooks will be for everybody else, they banned Dolores from the curriculum, and that amendment still stands. So she officially is still marginalized from textbooks, but hopefully that will change when more people learn about her story.
Okay, can the PBS, when it's shown on the 27th, can that be streamed? We don't have TV at our house.
You know what?
It can be streamed. You could also get it, I think it's also for sale on DVD online.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
You can call me. I'll hook you up with those guys.
Just call you. I don't have your number.
Dude, it's online.
Okay.
Find me later. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Miguel Rodriguez. I'm a senior at West High School. Thank you. Alright, so my question is, so how do we get youth activism started? Because there's a lot of people who are scared, especially dreamers, who are scared to go out and talk and tell their stories. And yeah, how do we get that started? Especially with the fear of immigration coming to their houses and deporting them.
That's such a good question, because that's what you confronted with the farm workers. They were afraid to say anything. They didn't want to speak out.
Yeah, I think it's very important for immigrants to be able to tell their stories, and there's organizations, there's schools, different organizations, like you have different clubs, like the Lions Club, the Elks Club, all of these different community groups, and women's organizations, also labor unions, to be able to tell their story too, because I think it's important for people to hear that story, because they get this other narrative that they hear about people being rapists and criminals and whatever, and that's what they hear on television, and people then get the wrong impression. And it's interesting because even some of I'm sure that President Trump has had a lot of immigrants working at his different Trump hotels that he's had, and at his horse stables and everything. And when they do all of that, when they denigrate people like that, it's just kind of a way for them to justify the ill treatment that they give their workers, right? So they kind of justify that. So it is very important to get our immigrant stories out there, especially the stories of families and what they go through. When we hear some of these immigrant stories of families, I mean, it breaks your heart what they're suffering. And now with deportations, all of these families that have been separated, women also who have been, detained, and then they put their children up for adoption they can't go to the hearings because they're in jail, they're detained. And so all of these stories are very heartbreaking. So I think any opportunity that you and other immigrants have, if you happen to be one, is very important that we tell our stories. Thank you.
What's also really critical to understand is that the fear that you have about organizing and you know, expressing your voice, it's a deliberate strategy to silence you. And so if you think about blacks who lived in the Jim Crow South, they lived in terror. White people could come in any time, pull a black man from his home, lynch him in the middle of the night. But that fear was a deliberate strategy to keep the people silent. And that was used against Native Americans. It's been used against, and you think about any community, even in labor, is to instill fear. But it's a strategic move to silence that community. So first of all, you have to recognize that that's a strategy, and then you have to counter that strategy with another one. But you can't let the fear paralyze you. You have to find a way to get the story out, because you think about what happened in the Civil Rights Movement. More and more people came together expressing their story, and pretty soon that story reached the North in New York, and then you had like white college students coming down doing the Freedom Bus rides, and it just became national, and then it became global. You think about Standing Rock, same thing. And so the more people hear your story, the more you dispel the fear.
Thank you.
Can I just, the other immigrant story that's never told is, why do immigrants come here in the first place? And they come here because they don't have opportunities in their own places where they live. And we think of places like Oaxaca and Chiapas, Guatemala, these beautiful, gorgeous places that we go to as tourists. But people leave there because they don't have opportunities. And then we say, well, why don't they have opportunities? And I like to use the word bananas. How many bananas do we eat every single day in the United States of America? Shouldn't the people of Guatemala be rich with all of the bananas that we eat? But no, because the money that we spend for our bananas does not go to the people in Guatemala or Mexico and Salvador. It goes to Dole banana, it goes to Chiquita banana. And so the people that actually on their land and they produce the bananas, they never get that money. So this is part of kind of the economic stories that we are not told. And so, because we in the United States, instead of really helping our countries to the south to kind of develop their own economies, we kind of colonize and take over their economies, right? And so people then live in poverty.
And the resources.
And the resources. And, I remember during the war, when we were trying to stop the war in Iraq, that somebody had a sign that said, "How did our oil get under their sand?" And so, as long as we're just exploiting other countries, for our own wealth, and we're not helping other countries, I think that's one of the things that we have to think about.
Okay, I'm getting nervous about time, but we're going to try this. Ladies, do you have a question? Look at this guy helping with the mic. You're so awesome.
Okay, thank you.
So my name's Ian, this is Nora, and I'm in the 6th grade, she's in the 5th grade, and we both participated in the walk.
Get a little closer to that mic, ladies.
Okay, thank you.
Can you start all over again?
We have a question. Okay. We participated in the walkout today. Dolores, what advice do you give to young activists about how to keep going when people try to bring you down and tell you that your voice shouldn't be heard and that you should just be quiet?
Well, I think today your voices were heard, by the actions that you took, which was wonderful. But you need to follow up on that action. And I would say to get everybody in your school to do an email, again, to your congressperson and to your senators and say, we need to have, good comprehensive gun legislation, and definitely get rid of some of these laws that we have right now, that people can, buy guns without background checks, that some of these automatic weapons need to be taken off the streets. And, make your own list. I know that you probably talked about that at your rallies today, but follow it up by, you've got to put pressure on the congresspeople and on the senators. And you can do a big campaign right in your own school so that the congressman, hopefully by next Monday, he will have a couple of hundred emails from your
Did
school.
you guys hear that?
A couple hundred emails from your
hundred.
school, okay? From all of your students, and then contact the other schools and have them do the same thing so that they can have over 1,000 emails from your school. Because your voices need to be heard, and keep it up, don't give up, all right?
Okay.
And I want to quote Michael Moore, by the way. We got to see him on Broadway, somebody bought tickets for us, and he said this: when you wake up in the morning, you got to do 3 things. We know we wash our faces, we brush our teeth, and we got to call our congressman. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, we have 2 more questions. You're the last question. You're next.
Hi, my name is Shauna. Thank you so much, Dolores. You are truly, truly beautiful. Thank you for your movie. When I go to the Sundance Film Festival, my favorite is to watch documentaries. And on International Women's Day, I hope you had a wonderful day. My question is, what can we do to support farmers and immigrant workers in agriculture today?
Well, one of the good things that you could do here in Utah is pass a couple of laws, actually 3. One of them so they can get unemployment insurance, which they still don't have in the state of Utah. We only have that in California and in Hawaii, okay? So that they can get a decent workers' comp law, so if they get hurt on the job, their medical bills and will be paid, and the time that they miss by working. And yes, pass a law, 2 laws actually. One to give them the right to organize, which you don't have that law, and get rid of right to work. That's a biggie.
Hola Dolores, thank you for sharing the space with us. Sorry, I'm a little bit taller than the last girls. Hopefully.
Where's the rock and roll guy?
Thank you.
Come on.
We're good.
Oh, she got it. Okay.
You're hired.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, my name is Karina, and I'm an industrial hygiene student at Utah State University. So, my job will be to protect the health and safety of workers in industrial type settings. But my question to you is, as a prospective industrial hygienist, what can I do not just to meet the minimum regulations that we have mandated by OSHA, but to really meet the needs of workers?
Wow. Good question.
Well, we do know that they have regulatory hearings, and it's good to show up to those regulatory hearings. And I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but again, we've got to elect people to office that can help us, because we know that they are rolling back a lot of the protections right now that workers have on the job, and we've got to be able to stop that one. I mean, I'll give you an example. One of the pesticides that Trump took off of the restricted list, right after he took that pesticide off of the restricted list, we had over 100 farm workers that were poisoned by that same pesticide in California. So we've got a lot of work to do, and maybe working with some of your state officials so that you can keep some of the protections that you now have in OSHA, and that we know we need more. We need more protections, because workers still do not have all of the protections that they need. But it's just, doing the work, keeping the pressure up, and getting other people to help you so that you're not there by yourself. That's the important thing.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, you know how there was that moment in the film when someone says that her excitement is infectious? Do you think you understand that now? All right. Dolores, thank you so much for being with us. Peter, thank you as well.
Before we all go away, I just a couple of things, and one of them I just want to say to people to learn more about our foundation, the work that we're doing. I mentioned a few of the things that we do, but we're on the web, DoloresHuerta.org, DoloresHuerta.org, and if you want to be on our mailing list, and we promise we won't bother you too much, maybe once a quarter, and that is, I'd say, into your cell phone you can put joindhf.org, Dolores Huerta Foundation, joindhf.org. But I always like to close up these wonderful events that we have, town halls that we have, but it just reminding people, and I'm going to ask you all the question. You've been asking us questions. I'm going to ask you the question now. And the question that I'm going to ask you who's got the power, okay? And I'm going to shout that out. I want you to shout it very loud to answer me back and say, we've got the power. And when I ask the question, I'm going to say, what kind of power? I want you to say people power, all right? Because we know that we are the majority, right? women, people of color, white men of conscience, right? Feminists, all of us feminists, we have the power. But again, if we don't use our power, then our democracy is going to vanish, literally. So we really got to realize that we have a responsibility. And as it says in the film, when we say, where's the power? It's in your person. All of us have the power, it's in our person. And that's all that we need. But we know that we've got to come together, and we can't do it by ourselves. We've got to take direct, nonviolent action and make changes. And we have to know that if we don't do it, no one's going to do it for us. We have to take responsibility. We can't say, oh, somebody's going to come and they're going to, defend us and they're going to, make things right for us. No, it's not going to happen. We have got to take the responsibility. So I'm going to ask you the question now, and I want you to shout it so loud so that the neo-Nazis and the alt-right can hear us. Okay, so let's go. Okay, who's got the power?
We got the power.
What kind of power?
People power.
Okay, one more time, but the second time when I say what kind of power, I want you to say voting power, all right? Voting power. Okay, let's go. Who's got the power?
We got the power.
What kind of power?
Voting power.
So, are we going to go out there and organize? Are we going to go out there and organize and make sure we get the people elected? No? What do we say? ¿Se puede o no se puede?
Sí, se puede.
And then I want to quote the Chilean poet Pablo Neruda, and this is what he said. He said, they can cut all the flowers, but they can't hold back the spring. They can cut all the flowers, but they can't hold back the spring. So we are going to be the gardeners. We're going to go out there, we're going to sow the seeds of justice, and those seeds of justice are going to bloom. And yes, we will be the spring, and we will achieve social justice by all of us working together. So muchas gracias. Thank you very much.